Welcome, everybody. Happy to have you joining us today for our conversation on sponsorship in endurance sports. I'm Brad McCabe. I'm managing partner of Sponsor Circle. We host a number of these sessions throughout the year, and happy to have you joining us today. Uh, on today's call, we've got Aaron Lafontaine from Spartan Race Canada, and Stephen Fleck is having some technical issues. We're hoping to have him on shortly from Canadian Endurance Sport Alliance. So we'll get him caught up as soon as we can get him onto the call. But they're really happy to have you here. This session is very conversational. Feel free to drop into the chat any questions you have as you go, and I'll weave them into the conversation as we can. As well, we've gotten a whole bunch of advanced questions from people, and happy to hopefully be able to address all of those through today's session. But first off, let me introduce Aaron Lafontaine, Director of Partnerships for Spartan Race Canada. And Aaron, can you tell us a little bit about what you do, and for anybody who doesn't know what Spartan does?
Sure. So Spartan Race has been around for about 12 years in North America. It's a global brand. In Canada, in 2020, it stopped being a licensed market and it's a corporate market now. So we report into Boston, the head office. It was perfect timing because we decided to do that just before COVID hit. 2020, we had no races and started again in 2021. We own Tough Things, so it's like Tough Mudder. We own I was telling Brad earlier, the Molokai to Oahu paddleboard race, which is 34 miles between two islands. If you haven't done Spartan is varying distances with different obstacles that you do in place. Spartan is timed. Tough Mudder is designed more to be with a group. Some of the obstacles you can't do unless you're in a team or you have some help, and so teams form on course. And it is untimed. It's much more about the challenge as opposed to kind of setting a certain time. We have 6 events in Canada. There's, like I said, 50 in the US, and then we're around the world. There's about probably around 200 events that we do internationally.
Yeah, so definitely a lot to keep you busy. And I know I've tried training for a Spartan. It's crazy. So it's amazing to see the participants go through that and just everything involved in it, because it's not a show up and do event. It's you need to prep for it.
You do. So, I mean, that's one of the things that, if you look at kind of what the foundation was, is that our founder, who's still involved, Joe DeSena, he was a broker on Wall Street, and he got tired of doing the 3 martini lunches and steak dinners, and he started inviting people to do, either training or hot sweat, hot yoga, or that kind of stuff. And it just evolved. He got more into this, and then his goal is to get 100 million people off the couch and do activities. And one of the things that Spartan can do is that they can take you from being, basically sitting on the couch and walk you through how to do your first Spartan race.
And I think it creates an interesting audience when it comes to looking at partners and how you get engaged, because it's not the one off. I guess we've got some prepared questions, and I'll wait for Steve to jump in. But I think the first piece is when you're approaching partners, do you talk about day of, or you talk about preparation? What's your conversations like?
Yeah, so it really depends on my background was I was at Maple Leaf Sport and Entertainment in the NBA for 25 years, and so I really hate the gold, silver, bronze package of sponsorship. And so what I do is I really want to understand, what are you trying to get out of this? I mean, if you're trying to do sampling against a certain target group, probably the most important thing is to tell people in advance that you're going to be there, and then really execute well on site. So it's less about, pre-race emails and that kind of exposure. But if you're a brand that, we work with gyms they install training sessions 4 to 6, 8 weeks in advance, and what they do is they attract people to come. So we'll do social takeovers, and they'll start talking to people about how to train. So you really have to be flexible in how you're going to kind of approach the sponsorship and the activation.
Yeah, I mean, and that makes it pretty unique. And how have you seen the trends pre-COVID, through COVID, and now? How's that been looking for engagement and where you're seeing participation from partners and participants?
So what I would say is that, if you look at kind of where the business was before COVID, it was very robust, lots of people doing it, people traveling a lot. Like there are people that would, go to 10 to 12 races a year, right? And they would do different lengths. We could do an evaluation based on, postal codes and registrations and things like that, or zip codes. And what we could see is that people were doing, crazy amounts of events. COVID comes in and people are staying close to home. 2021, I would say that you started to see people doing more races. The beginning of 2021, um, I'm getting my dates actually worked. 2022, what we saw is the beginning. People were not in shape. They had been, shut down and not doing very much. And they were tentative to come back and do kind of events. Second half of that year, we started to see numbers return to normal. In 2023, we're seeing pre-COVID numbers. I don't think we're seeing the travel. It used to be that we would see probably 10% of our Canadian athletes were traveling far enough that they had to get on a plane. And I would think that that probably fell to about 6%. Um, but it was increasing over the course of the year.
Which is great to see that it's coming back, but you're still feeling a lag, which seems to be the similar conversation I'm hearing with a lot of people. Um, and then looking at your events and just the process, the partner or the participants are really kind of they're individually focused. They're focused on their training. They might be training in a group. How does that transfer into audience engagement beyond the participants themselves?
So here's the interesting thing is that, having worked in pro sports for a long time, you hear kind of these attributes and you think, and you take them with a bit of a grain of salt. But one of the things I heard about Spartans was that they're passionate about brands that help them achieve their goals, and they support brands that are helping them achieve their goals. And it's because they're driven. I mean, these are largely type A personalities that really are measuring themselves against not so much other people, but I did it last year in I'm going to make it up 2 hours and 15 minutes, and this year I did it in 2 hours and 12 minutes, and I'm feeling much better about it's very individually driven. Um, you'll see them at the finish line, and I've seen this, is that if there's a new bar, you're sampling a new energy bar, they will take it and they will read it, right? Those are the core people are actually going to, before they ingest anything, they want to understand what the product is. However, if they like the product, they will actually go out of their way and try and buy it right on site. I mean, I've told sponsors, be ready for that. And I'll use an example is we had Crank Coffee in 2022 at Blue Mountain, and it became, the coffee was there, and they were so happy that you're at an event that I'm passionate about. I'm going to support you. That the guys at Crank had to run out to Staples and buy a square terminal so they could start selling product. I mean, that passion, that intensity it's really strong.
And I guess, and as you're describing the fact that the participants are reading the labels, does that create a vetting process that you need to go through when you're looking at potential partners and who you'll bring in?
100%.
Standard.
So there's nutrition guidelines on the Spartan side. Um, so I had an agency come and they kept on talking about Pepsi. They wanted to have Pepsi come. Pepsi would never be allowed to come to a Spartan race. Now, Tough Mudder, we can do anything we want, right? Because that is a much more relaxed kind of they're still athletic, but it's a more relaxed focus. But we do have a vetting process so that we make sure that we're putting people um, putting good product in front of our Spartan athletes.
And so how much audience research do you need to do to figure out what's appropriate to bring in brand wise for, Spartan, or what's appropriate for Tough Mudder? Or is it just kind of delineated from the guidelines that you've got?
So what I'll do is, we'll have a brand that wants to be involved. I'll just simply ask them for their nutrition guidelines and I'll send it to them. And I'll send it internally and it'll get vetted and they'll come back and go, this is 100% what we want. I mean, people know, like there's people, it's not to say that we don't, I'll give you a good example. The Chung Chun rice dog, which is the hot dog, it's the new pogo, fast food pogo. It was at Blue Mountain. We're not saying no that we don't have it, but the thing is that that's obviously a product that is uh, a cheat, a reward. What we try and stay away from is the sugary kind of stuff that might be in a energy drink. It's got something wrong with it, so that's what we'll try and do.
And that makes sense. And do you spend a lot of time, looking at endemic versus endemic partners? I know Bruce has jumped in, just kind of seeing how much interest you're seeing from non-endemic partners.
So here's the interesting thing is I'll use a really good example is FitAid seven is a seven-figure sponsor in the US, right? FitAid in Canada is basically run out of the garage of a guy in Caledon. So when I started and they said, well, go get FitAid, the guy from FitAid did not couldn't bring the right product into Canada because you couldn't get Health Canada approvals. And number two is only had listings with some gyms. So there was no way that, I was going to get a factor of 10. I was going to get, 10% of whatever was happening in the United States. And so the endemic business you have to be careful about because you can't it's not sustainable in Canada. So we talk to more people like cars, like cars, banks, we're talking airlines. Those are the things that we're talking about that want to try and reach our target group. So, and to that point, and I know there was a question that was said, how do you get people to sponsor an event that in a sport or activity that no one's heard of? So we had 14,000 unique postal codes from Canadian registrants to Canadian events from 2019 to 2021. So we took them to Environics, and Environics gave us a a report on what our community looked like. And so now what we do is I don't tell people we reach your target group. I can now go to people and I can say, this is our community. Does it resonate for you? Right. And so then that gets us a conversation with people because they go, wow, I just thought there were a bunch of crazy people who did these things. And now I'm seeing that they're kind of upscale family members in large urban areas. And this is exactly who we're trying to reach.
I think that's some of the elements that, looking at the participants and going through those demographics, it kind of creates, a defined group for you. I think about triathlon and just the equipment you've got to buy, buying a really nice bike, having the time to commit if you're going to do Ironman, that changes, the profile of who's going to be there because they've got to have the time and the commitment and the wherewithal to be able to do it.
100%. 100%. That's exactly why the triathlon is a good example in that, like I'll be talking to somebody, a CEO or someone senior, and I'll ask them, do they know what Spartan is? And I know I'm going to have success when they can reach in the back and they show me their 4 medals that they've won in the last year, right? And so they get the kind of the mentality and the audience that you're trying to reach. And you're right, is um when we went to Kelowna for the Canadian North American Championships in 2022, and it was the first time we'd been to Big White, and Sport Tourism Canada came in and did an analysis, and the amount of money that was being spent by the people who were there, the people who came for the race, outside of what they were doing race wise. So we didn't want to know about your hotel, we didn't want to know about your flight there, didn't want to know how much you were spending. It's like kind of like ecotourism, except it's fitness tourism. And they were spending money on wineries, restaurants, all that kind of stuff. And the amount of money that they were spending outside of the race was incredible. It was just incredible. So
Yeah, well, especially when it's designed as a destination activity as opposed to I'm just doing a 2.5 hour 10K walk.
right, right. So that's why, I mean, we've really started to play around with our locations. That's why we're at Tremblant. That's why we're at Blue Mountain. That kind of stuff is to be able to realize that our community was traveling with a family. Like Blue Mountain, it's crazy. We'll have 10,000 racers, but we'll have 35,000 spectators, companions, because everyone comes with their wife or husband and kids, and we have a kids race, and mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunts and uncles, siblings come. I mean, if you're trying to reach families and then you just go to the Spartan kids race, which is attached to the other side, they're all there all day. It's crazy. It's just insane to see how many people are there.
And I imagine from an activation standpoint, when you've got an activity that's taking several hours to complete, where the families and spectators can't really see the activity. Like I think if they're at the top of the Blue Mountain, you're not going to be able to see them from the base. If you've got really engaging activities and activation, you're going to get a lot of engagement from that.
Right. We talk about festival challenges as giving people something to do when they're in the festival. Because remember, these are competitive people. So if you do it like something simple, like hang from this bar for 30 seconds and you have a chance to win something, you'll get 20 people standing around trying to all compete for that, right? So those are the really important things.
And I got a note from Steve. He's still having technical difficulties, so it's going to be the Aaron and Brad show today. So hopefully everybody's good with that. And he
Yeah, I'm good
sends.
at overcoming obstacles because I work for Spartan. He will get here. He just will be a little slower. He's going to endure. That's how it's going to work.
Yeah. I mean, certainly Steve's got a great presence. Just the fact that he sees so many different events from what he does from the Canadian Endurance Sport Association, and then from just being an MC out of a lot of events. But I know you'll carry through, Aaron. So happy to have you do that for us. And then I guess Bruce has jumped in with another call. Just how much do you spend on a focus when you're talking about brand engagement of talking about the participants versus everybody else who's going to be as a spectator or in the festival space?
So, I mean, we kind of used to give the number only of the athletes, like the participants. But now, because you're reaching out to a whole bunch of different people, we start to talk about who else are you reaching. They're a lot the same. I mean, like obviously, you're not going to see somebody. Here's what I would say: if I'm training to do a Spartan race, and my partner does not haven't want anything to do with it, the chances are I'm not going to show up at the Spartan race as a companion. However, what I see is that there's a person who might be running, someone who isn't running at the same time, but largely what you're seeing is a couple of kids are running. The wife might run in the morning, the husband might run in the afternoon. That's what you're kind of seeing, is that there's a group that is inclined to be open or engaged in the activity.
No, and I could definitely see that. Just for my own personal element is, you do it with your partner.
Yeah.
And you keep each other motivated, and it works out really well when you're both doing the same thing. Um, and I know you've just kind of ended the season in Canada, and as we were talking beforehand, you're starting to work through reports for all the partners. What do you do to showcase ROI for your events?
So I think that I mean, for me, ROI starts at the beginning, is understanding what does a what is a sponsor or a brand hoping to get out of this, right? And so the thing is that, is it, you know, we work closely with Rain, and when we talked to Rain had originally um, uh, cans in hands. They wanted people sampling, right? They wanted people drinking, and they thought that their product was really good. It tasted better than others, and so there was a bunch of other people coming into the marketplace, and they wanted to fend them off. And so it really became, let's find ways to make sure that they're well located and well promoted so that people know what they're doing. So their ROI was, make sure that if we bring 10,000 cans, all 10,000 cans get out, right? But other people have different things, which is sign-ups or things like that. And so it's constantly checking in with them. I mean, I'm on site for most of the races, and I'm talking to people and I'm saying, okay, how are things working? And we do a complete debrief from race to race to make sure that we're hitting kind of what their numbers are, and pivoting when we need to kind of, okay, that's not working, or that's working, let's do more of it, so we'll make sure that we're hitting what they think is valuable.
Fantastic. And it looks like we just got some success. We got Steve logged in. Oh, he's just connecting to audio, so we'll get him to introduce himself in a minute. But happy to have you there. Steve, you connected now? All right, we'll let him jump in when he gets through. But happy to persevere trying to get connected onto the session. So we've got so Mark is looking at, do you find that sponsorship can take over your event? Are you spending more time, delivering on the sponsorship piece and the party versus the event focus? And I guess that comes down to, how do you and the program team fit into one another?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think that the tension is that the event team is definitely focused on doing the event, right? They want to make sure that, timing works, that the obstacles are in great shape, the race course is in good shape, registration, we hate any lineups for registration. Those kind of processes are really important. And so that's why, in the setup in the week before, when you're really, because it takes us about 10 days to set up a race course, the whole festival area conversation is about doing two things: processing the athletes to get them to make sure they're having a good experience, but also to make sure that the sponsors are interacting with them, so that there is a good festival area so people will stay. And there's a bit of tension, and there should be tension, I mean, because our race director is really focused on making sure that the race runs well. And so he might push back and say, I don't want that there because X. And then I have to make the case for why that sponsor needs to be there. And so that's always the challenge that we face. And that's something that it should be a challenge, to make sure that you're striking the right balance.
And I guess it also comes down to negotiating what's in a contract and what's not in a contract, and making sure the partners are aware. Because I've certainly run into it myself, where you get a partner shows up on site and their XM team just takes over, and then you're doing a lot of work trying to hem them back together.
Yeah, I would much rather have the problem of trying to hold them back than engage them to do more. I mean, like, I can tell you that, my wife's a teacher, and she'll walk by, and she is more critical than I am about. She'll walk by and she'll say, they were just on their phone. They weren't doing anything. She said, that's, you got to go fix that. And I think that that's, I am aware of that, but it's really good. If you're an XM team and my teacher wife is finding you to be bad, that's a real problem. And you're not doing a good enough job. And I would much rather have to tell people to calm down than to amp up, because that adds a very engaged activation only adds value to the whole event.
Do you find you have to do much coaching when it comes to, you get a brand engaged, and then all of a sudden you get pushed over to their XM agency for delivery on site, and then they've got a paid brand ambassador there. So now all of a sudden you're two steps away from the brand manager who signed on to the contract.
Yeah, you have to make sure that, and it's also a tension, right? Because that word again. But if you don't, I'll give an example. So we had Hello Fresh was very keen to be involved with us last year, and they wanted to do a first attempt in our Toronto race. And the brand, we had talked with the brand team about how they were going to activate on site. and they had a great activation with all kinds of things happening. They were going to reward people with free meals and stuff like that, and we had really clear ROI. Their ambassador team came and did not bring a tent, and so hid kind of in this little area that was protected from the sun, not the rain, from the sun, and didn't really, and had some cards to hand out, and that was it. So I knew when I got back, when we had the debrief after, I knew that they were not coming back because the execution was horrible. It was terrible because they just were not doing what the brand had thought that the activation team was going to do. Was nowhere near the same thing. So that's something that, yeah, I had to deliver the bad news. This is why you're not coming back. I called it before they told me. So
Yeah, and that's, sometimes not of your fault, but it's a big challenge when you've got those agencies, and just kind of making sure they understand the effect of what their team's going to be doing.
100%. And then you get like, there's agencies that I've seen activate that I would push. Um, I might be talking to somebody and they go, "We don't have an activation agency. Don't know how, we want to do this," and I will direct them to certain agencies because they do a really good job.
Do you get a lot of people who will come to you expecting you to do the activation?
Some, and we do have that capability. Um, and uh, it's yeah, I think that the problem is that so many people have lost a couple things. There's been a lot of decline in the capability to do experiential, and that came through COVID. And so some people are trying to ramp up, and some people are trying to do it using third party. And so we have to be able to play that role where we need to. Um, I think the other thing that drives me a bit crazy is there are people just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to understand the opportunity because I've got my idea of what I want to do. I don't need to look at anything new. I mean, I always used to use the example that it was like Dragon's Den, is you want to hear every idea, and it might take you 15 minutes to say I'm out, but it also might take you 15 minutes to say this is valid. I need to work on this a bit more to understand it and figure out how I can make it work for my client.
I definitely saw through 2022 that a lot of companies that did a lot of experiential, a lot of hands-on field marketing pre-COVID. There, the conversations back to me were, we don't we don't have staff. We just physically can't get bodies to it. And then now you're saying you've got an element where you're going to take on some of it. Are you increasing your prices to match that, or are you just saying it's a cost of doing business with the partner?
I think it depends on the level of activation. Is that what we can do is um, we can deliver it, but we'll do a cost plus kind of thing. That's what we're going to do. I mean, I don't think that this is a new issue. I mean, I go back, oh my God, to like 1997, and I was working for the NBA, and we were bringing the 3-on-3 tournament, and we were going to go across Canada, and we had so many people that would say, I do this, but I don't know how to activate it. They had money, but no resources, right? Which is a really interesting combination. And, the example was ClearNet, which was a telecommunications firm, which is now TELUS, became TELUS. But ClearNet came to us and said, we desperately want to do this, and we have all kinds of money. We just don't have the resources. And so we said, okay, fine. And the next year we partnered with an agency and we increased our prices. We almost doubled our prices. And we said, we will come up with the idea and we will execute the idea for you. And so ClearNet, and we sold that to about 5 different sponsors where we did everything for them. It was amazing. It was a really good solution.
I guess coming back to that push and pull with program, you've got the sponsor bend where you're trying to deliver that, and then the program team who's really focused on, this is the event. How much challenge do you find when you're trying to roll those ideas up and say, okay, we need to add on to our team to make this happen?
Well, as long as we're doing it inside the sponsorship side, and we're doing it in the festival, I think there's no problem. The program team is like, knock yourself out, right? They have resources that they can share with us, but they're basically like, here's your space, go and do what you need to do. Like the only thing that we don't do on the Spartan side is our CEO decided that on course branding was not something that he was going to do, which is, like, and is a an obstacle would have branding on it. And it makes total sense that we don't do this because you're limiting your exposure to, first of all, just the athletes. And number two is, like I tell all the sponsors, we're like, our festival, our courses open at 7 o'clock in the morning. And sponsors will ask me, what time should I be there? And I go 9. And they go, well, the races start at 7. And I said, you are not going to sell anyone anything or get them to notice you when all they're focused on is I'm about to run 20K and like I'm about to do a 4-hour race, right? They're not focused on that. They might take notice of you that I'm gonna go back to you. Or if you're like a physiotherapy company, they will definitely notice that that's exactly where I'm going, or a cold plunge. But you need to remember that where you need to be is when they've finished that race, right? Not necessarily at the beginning.
And I guess that's a difference where, I think about a charity walk where when it's done, people leave. And I find with the endurance races, people are sticking around. There is that milling about. They want to consort with all of the people who've, felt that experience with them.
Yeah.
So it creates a different feeling in the festival space.
Absolutely. And you see that really with Tough Mudder is you'll see teams of 75 people show up, right? And so they'll race and then they want to spend, as long as or longer than they ran celebrating the experience that they just shared. And then they meet with other people too, right? So then the thing is that it becomes a real a vibe inside the festival.
And I know some other endurance races that I've had conversations with, they actually take advantage of the night before for some engagement. So they'll do night before the event itself, and then the evening after, and creating that, it's an experience. So there's a big pasta night or something where you're carb loading, and then they brought brands into that piece.
Yeah, and we've done that in some cases. Again, it comes down to the fact that depending on when, because you don't like on a marathon, everyone starts at the same time, whereas we start in heats, like we go off in different in flights. So it doesn't necessarily work that the night before is something that would resonate with everyone.
Okay. Yeah, no, definitely. It's, trying to know what your event is and what it isn't,
Yeah.
and being able to.
Yeah, like I've heard great things about like the marathons, and what they do is they do the race festivals. I'm going to be honest with you, I've also heard that they're terrible, because the thing is that people roll in and they just want to get their bibs, and they want to get check in, check out, and get out, and then prepare and start preparing for the race. And so yeah, that's an interesting balance that you have to figure out. Like you said, you need to know your sport. You need to know how things work, right?
I know one of the things that I've, from my experience of just trying to prep for a Spartan, you've got your plans. Like there's information that you're putting out, and there's your week 2 of your training program. Here's what you need to do. Have you ever run partnerships alongside those training plans for social or digital engagement?
Yeah, 100%. We've done um, usually with gyms. What we'll do is we'll say they'll do a 6-week kind of prep. They've done virtual so that if you are running for the first time and you're not near a OCR, obstacle course racing gym, focused gym, you can do things in advance. We've had sponsors sponsor that so that if you join, then we're going to help you go on your way to do that, right? And so we also we have had proposals. We haven't had anyone do it, which is athletes that have never run a Spartan race. Oh, I'll give you a good example. This is what we did. So finisher beer is really important for both Spartan and especially Tough Mudder. I met the Rally Beer guys. They're a beer company they were up in near Collingwood. There's cyclists that decided to do a functional beer that has electrolytes and salts in it. And so I was talking to them. They became a sponsor, and I was talking to them, and they said, the one guy just told me that he had just ridden the Buttertart Trail, which is 700 kilometers in kind of central Ontario. And he said, and that, he did that in 3 days. And he said, I don't think I could do a Spartan race. And I said, you just rode your bike 700 kilometers. I think you could do a Spartan race. And he said, you know, the obstacles scare me. And so, okay, so the obstacles scare him. So then the next thing we were talking about was that, he said that sometimes after he has done some rides, they go into, bike races, and they'll go out in the last wave. They'll be last. And he said, we call it the rally wave, and it's just a bunch of us riding to support the event and to get a ride in. So we created the rally wave for Spartan, which was a bunch of guys, a bunch of people who had never done a Spartan race before. You signed up and you got you got a buff. We gave you a limited edition buff that was sponsored. You got to go to events where we would show you how to do obstacles. There was beer there. There was non-alcoholic beer there. One of the gyms was doing it. We had about 4 events, and then those guys, that group, all ran together at the end of it. And it brought about 250 to 300 people to the Blue Mountain race that had never done a Spartan race before. So that's an example of team building, sponsor connecting, and adding value to the whole equation.
And having seen Joe talk about his whole motivation for Spartan Race and wanting to have those emotional connections and psychological discoveries about yourself, doing that as a team building for a partner, I think that would be resonate incredibly well.
Yes, I think that it really does. That's why I think that the approach is, you see people at Tough Mudder and they're running as a group. There's a company and those kinds of things, and it's like team building, right? That's exactly what it is.
Um, you and I have both been around, sponsorship for quite some time. What do you find, some successful elements that you've seen in endurance sports sponsorship, and ones that just haven't gelled well?
What has not gelled well? I think you have to really think about, I'm not going to speak about specifically, you really have to think about what are you doing on the ground? Like where are, how are you engaging in the festival area? So one of the best was, so Iron Vegan, which is a protein powder, which is obviously it resonates with the community, but they worked with Popeyes, and what they had, this was hilarious. They had the spin the wheel, and you could win different prizes. You could win things like a shaker bottle. You could win some product. You could win a discount. And the penalty for not being able to do an obstacle in Spartan is you do burpees, right? So they also, on the wheel, they had like if you could spin and win a prize, but you could also spin, you had to do 10 burpees. And you would see people spin and get 10 burpees, and they'd be doing the 10 burpees. That's all they were doing. They weren't going to go again, but that's what they were doing. They were also selling Iron Vegan on site, and Popeyes called it the best single day activation that they had ever seen. So they were engaging. They had sample product. They had smart people who knew the product that could talk to the Spartan athletes about what the benefits and why you should have it. And then you could sell it right then and there. But they also had a fun engagement. Those are things absolutely, totally bang on. That's what you should do, right? The standing there and behind a table is death. It just, you're not, people come up, but there's just no reason to come up, right? People will talk to you, but you need to have something that's kind of engaging. That's really important.
Yeah, it always becomes if you're standing behind the table, sitting on your 2 chairs, you've created a barrier. So
Yeah.
how do you open that up? So, I know one of the things you always hear about, but people don't always think about is you get your package and you put that in front of a partner, and you think you've ticked all their boxes. But sometimes you need to draw, this is what your activation should look like. This is what your sponsorship should look like, and how it will flow in this event, which may be different than any of their other thinking.
So the first year in Blue Mountain, 2021, we had a kids race, and what we had was, when the kids were finished, the amount of swagger and excitement that they have when they're done, they could have done maybe an adult race at the end. And these are kids that are 6 years old, right? And you'd see, and they started climbing over everything. They would climb over fences, and they were climbing over up trees and all kinds of stuff. So the energy is absolutely incredible. The insight that we had there was, okay, when they're done the race, they want to do things. So in the next year, last year, what we did was we set up with Mastermind Toys an activation center where the kids got to do, they had to climb zip lines, all that kind of stuff, play with toys and do all that kind of stuff because they have so much energy that they need to do more. And I mean, the proposal was that what Mastermind was going to do is they were going to staff it with their play experts from their stores. And then what they were actually going to do is sell, like, oh, did you like that zip line? It's on sale right now for $69. They didn't do that. But what we had was the amount of kids that were, and parents standing around all day long playing at the event. So now what I'm doing is I'm going out and I'm talking to a few other people and I'm saying, here's the insight, here's the opportunity, and here's how you can actually monetize it right on site. And so it's you need to give them, if they have an interest, or you either have to understand what they're trying to do and then respond to that kind of brief, or you can bring insights to them and you can say, if you fill this need, you're going to succeed. This is going to be really powerful for you.
And I guess there must be a fine line that you see between the creating a brand experience and monetization.
Yeah.
And you have to work with them pretty tightly to make that work, or it just sort of flows naturally within your space.
I think that we want to monetize it more than they want to. I mean, we keep on saying sell, like sell on site. It's an insight that's the, our community wants to support the brands. They want, you're here. I'm incredibly, this is the dumbed down version. I'm incredibly passionate about Spartan. You're here supporting Spartan through your sponsorship and your involvement. I want to support you. The transference is very strong. So you should take advantage of it while you have the opportunity, right? That's very important.
One of the questions we had in advance was around sustainability, and thinking about the footprint of Spartan Race or a marathon or similar, and the fact that you have destination events. Is there a lot of conversation about sustainability?
Yeah, we have some challenges in that, we're not doing we don't carbon offset anything, for example. But what we do is we have a team that goes about making sure that we're recycling on site. Number one, sorting and recycling on site. Number two is that, at the end of the day, when you are when you're done, it's particularly Blue Mountain on the Saturday when it was raining and people were going through in all kinds of mud, is that what we were doing was recycling some people just throw their shoes away. We're recycling all their shoes. And so those are a couple opportunities of things that we're doing. And the other thing is remediation. I mean, where we are at Tremblant, we are next to a protected area. So it's not like we come and we rip. Our footprint is, although we're all across the mountain, our footprint is very careful that we're not tearing things up. So, and we remediate from what we've done.
As you're describing the path of people through the race, and especially post race, I'm thinking about different brand engagements you can bring in, and I know at the end of this race, everybody's muddy, and you've got hoses available for people to hose down. But I'm just thinking, going, that's a natural for a P&G or a Unilever to step into.
Yes, like we have we've tried to pitch them, and it's just, this is the block, is that maybe we're talking to the wrong person, but you're absolutely right. Those are really important moments. Particularly, one of the things that we're moving forward with is a recovery zone, and is having a physiotherapist on site is really important because they get used all day. They benefit from it because they get exposure to, if they're in the local community, they do very well. And so, but that begs a question, which is, if I'm all muddy, how do I get on a table and get the treatment right away? And so that means you have to have a good cleaning solution. And so that opens up, somebody like P&G Acts and stuff, or Unilever or something like that to do it. And it all becomes, you're adding value to the racer experience, and they will remember that. Those are really important things. I mean, I remember a guy, he was the weatherman for CTV in Sudbury, and he had run the day before and he was trying to do a trifecta. So he had done a 20K on Saturday and he was going to do a 10 and a 5 on Sunday. Don't ask me why, but he was going to. And I saw him on the Saturday afternoon and he said, I can't move my hip. And he went to I said, go to the physiotherapist. That's why she's there. He went there and he used these Normatec kind of, they inflate so they reduce inflammation. He went home that night and he spent $900 on he had Normatec sitting in a cart on his computer and he bought it that day and we came and ran the 5 and the 10 and finished. He finished his trifecta. And so, I mean, that's a perfect example of, if you're the physiotherapist that got him back, he'll remember you. And oh, if Normatec had been the sponsor, it worked out well for them. They got a $900 sale just by that experience.
Yeah, and that's just knowing every element from beginning to end, from training to recovery.
Right.
You know, the size of your event's quite big. So what are your thoughts on smaller events? So, when you're looking at a couple hundred people, thinking some of the cycling races where it is a couple hundred participants, any advice for some of the attendees who are coming from those smaller spaces?
Yeah, I think that it's really important that your your community, who your community is. So doing research about who's there. Like even a Survey Monkey results about, what age, income, education. Those are really important things that you can go to a sponsor and you can say, let me tell you who you are going to reach. And then thinking about, what are the things that are going to resonate with your community and who can provide those things, right? That's the important thing. When it's smaller, you need to do a bit more work. And it's also, also the dollars are not as high, but you're also going to reach somewhat less sophisticated or resource heavy sponsors, right? You know what I mean?
It really comes down to, the value of the attendee and understanding who they are, so you can actually go and say, yeah, this event is a $5 per person investment, but this event could be $100 per person investment.
Yeah, we had the sponsor at Blue Mountain, and the machine that he was doing, which does 3D body imaging, can tell you about balance and gait and all that kind of stuff, and it's got cameras and it rotates you and all that kind of stuff. He originally wanted to set up outside, and then when the weather turned bad, he couldn't do it, and he explained to me that the machine was worth $16,000. Well, that scared me for two reasons. Number one was I didn't want it to be sitting outside in the rain, and number two is there's no way I thought that we were going to be successful, featuring a $16,000 machine at our event. So I kept on checking in with him over and over and over again. And what he was able to tell me was he had gyms, and he had racers expressing interest in buying the machine. And so I knew that our racers are wealthy and have all kinds of money and stuff like that and spend money on this stuff. Did I think that somebody was going to be sitting there, being a prospect for a $16,000 machine? No. So I learned something there, which is, when we're talking about it, is that people will spend money on something that they're very passionate about. And so, if you're doing a cycling, those guys are spending $5,000 on bikes, right? More.
And it's, sometimes it's understanding how many customers they need. I like to reference that if you go through Ottawa Airport, when you're sitting in line to go through security, there's a poster just on the end of the security line, and it is always for some military device, whether it's a helicopter or engine or whatever. And it was like they're only looking to talk to 4 people.
Yes.
But they're spending a lot of money to have that placement.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. And like, if you think about it, Spartan is, above average in income. They're very passionate. Where else are you going to advertise a $16,000 machine you can set up in your house that will help you with your balance and gait? Right.
And I imagine, the growth in endurance sport, the growth, especially in Spartan, seeing American Ninja on TV on an ongoing basis. you know, because we've got a question from Josh here. Is just what's the biggest challenge? Are you seeing a continued growth because you're seeing it on TV on an ongoing basis and kids are motivated and the gyms are starting to accommodate that, or is it starting to plateau, or are there other challenges you're facing?
I think the biggest challenge is that it's hard. Number one, right, is that it's not easy. But I think that we had over 1,100 kids race at Blue Mountain, right? And so, and that's the second year in a row that we've had. And by kids, I mean you can race from till you're 4 till 13 as a kid. Um, and I think that there is exposure. I think it's also about parents trying to teach their kids some resilience. That's a really important thing. That's a trend that people keep talking about, is teaching your kids to overcome things. That's an opportunity to be able to do it. I think that this is not going to be, I mean, a version of obstacle course racing will be in the Olympics in LA. It will be part of the modern pentathlon, replacing, of all things, horseback riding. And so that's good exposure. But I think that, it's never going to be, we're not going to have 55,000 people at a race, but we are certainly going to see in the 10 to 15,000 people, and how many races can we have, right? It's not for everyone, that's for sure.
And sort of ties into one of the questions we had in advance. You're talking about non-Olympic sports and things that aren't a household understanding of a sport. And I would say Spartan probably for a very long time would have fit into that. And as we were talking, pre-session about the paddleboard event in Hawaii, like how do you even start a conversation about something that people have probably only hearing for the first time from you?
Well, I think that you have to do your work. So, I mean, I now know they're advertising now, but Olukai was a kind of Hawaiian flavored shoe. And you start doing your research about, what vibe, what personality would fit into this, right? And you're not looking for very much money. And I know there was a question before, and they talk about, with social media and digital being so important. That's in that particular moment, the stories about the documentaries that are created around the racers that participate in the Molokai to Oahu paddleboard race, that's where the payoff comes for the sponsor. And so I think what you have to think is you know you need to figure out who your audience is, and it may not be very big, but if you can reach out, it goes back to what you said earlier, is that it's the number of people that you need, is that if you can serve that community well, your sponsor is going to be happy, right?
And I think it becomes one of those elements where storytelling becomes incredibly important. So how do you weave the story for the brand into the activity rather than it just being that completely marketing element? So Mark just dropped in. This reminds me about a local newspaper could get you exposure to a very targeted audience, being able to sell $10,000 ad hanging on your fridge, so they would tear out of the paper. So yeah, I think it's just one of those elements where, yeah, you create the story, people are going to put it somewhere that's highly visible.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's, again, I mean, high school football in the U.S. Is niche. It's small. Even in Canada, it's small. But if you serve it well, you're reaching a community that is interested in it, and you just need to connect. You need to connect the dots between sponsor and end user, right? That's the important thing.
Well, it's been fantastic having you. Thank you for filling in on both sides. Unfortunately, Steve couldn't join us, but any parting words you want to share with everyone?
I think, the questions were that I saw was just how do you kind of gain traction? And I think it's really understanding your community of who you serve and what their needs are. And then if you can match up somebody who can satisfy or address those needs, that sponsor is going to have a good success. Your customer is going to have good success. And that in that moment there is where you're really making the sponsorship work.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Aaron. If you're great, I'm going to share your contact and Steve's contact and LinkedIn's in the post email. So I'll send that out along with the link to the recording. So this has been recorded and will be posted up for people to check out afterward. We will have some sessions. I'm just putting them together for the new year. We try to run these about every 6 to 8 weeks. So if you have ideas on sessions you'd like to hear about, send me a note, and happy to reach out and put that together with people in the space. I found people like Aaron have been incredibly excited to put their hand up and be part of these conversations. So thank you so much for joining, Aaron. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.